Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And Cam, you just got back from what is it, Ohio Forage and Grasslands Conference, or
Yeah. So it is getting tricky to keep all of these organizations straight. And the nice thing about this, they met at the Ohio Department of Ag. So I literally had to turn right out of my driveway, drive 25 minutes, and turn left into their driveway. It's right down the road. So yeah, the Ohio Forage and Grassland Council. It's the Ohio organization, obviously, for the American Forage and Grassland group, and they just got done, I believe, with their annual meeting down in Florida, and had some updates about that from the president of the Ohio chapter.
clear down in Florida. I wouldn't have thought of that as being so much, grasslands.
Yeah, you wouldn't unless you're thinking about some of those warm season perennials that are summer high quality. I think the goal of it is to get producers and grazers away from maybe some of those colder Midwest temperatures. The fun thing with the Ohio group, this was, I believe, their annual state meeting, and certainly an organization I'm going to try to get more involved in. Knew a number of the people there, and they had asked if I could come over and talk about solar grazing, and had a really good discussion with kind of where we're at in Ohio and kind of what the solar grazing landscape looks like here in the Midwest, and then why do we see this booming in Ohio, in uh, the U.S. right now? And so that was led into a number of good questions. They did a couple of producer presentations, very similar to what you've done at the Ohio Grazing Conference, Indiana Grazing Conference, telling about the improvements people have made on their own operations. And I just enjoy, they had a beef producer, had a dairy producer, had a gentleman on there that I think he said 850 acres of hay. He has a hay business,
Huh.
dealing with far more hay equipment than what I ever thought you could use.
Yeah.
He's putting up 850 acres worth of small square bales
Wow.
to sell into the horse market. And as you can imagine, very few of those bales are handled individually by hand,
Right.
which is the way that I grew up having to make hay. So, yeah, 850 acres, not to minimize it, but um, 850 acres of small squares when you're not the person on the wagon and actually have all the equipment to do it efficiently and effectively. Very different than when they're coming out of the old New Holland baler, uh, one by one.
Yeah.
So I that's the only way it'd be possible. The one, there was a gentleman sitting behind me that I had to chuckle a little bit because after he said how many acres of hay he was baling, he's like, "Are there even that many dry days in a year?" And it's like, well, that's a good bring up a valid question. And then as he's talking about all of his equipment and stuff that the industry, the hay industry, doesn't even have, that he's had to have fabricated. He's talking about tedding hay at 36 acres an hour, and in
Wow.
my brain, I'm like, oh man, a 10-hour day, you're still only getting 360 acres. And I kind of had to wake myself up. It's like, Cameron, there aren't very many people doing 360 acres of hay in a single cutting type
Yeah.
situation. So that was probably my favorite producer talk. And then they had brought up Chris Teutsch from, I hope I'm saying his last name right, but works for University of Kentucky Extension, and has some really, if you've given any consideration to bale grazing, I'm sure you've seen his resources. And so what he was presenting on was a lot of information that I've seen him present on previously, but it's still fun to sit there and listen to some of the new stuff that they're working on. And his big thing and the drive home point for Ohio this year, and we've talked about it before, being at a in a drought year, how do you graze and how do you manage livestock for that drought year? And a lot of it has to do with how you're grazing in those years that you don't have a drought.
Mm.
And so that was that was kind of interesting to hear him talk about that. And then the other kind of take home point was it's projected that one out of every 5 years we have a lower rainfall event. So not quite like not severe drought, but kind of drought-like conditions or pre-drought conditions. 1 out of every 5 years, and then 1 out of every 10 years, you should be planning for a severe drought. And he said it's always fun to have, I guess not necessarily fun when it's a drought, but it's interesting when you're how short your memory is when and I'm sure we've experienced dry years before. I'm guilty of saying, "Oh, we've never seen weather this dry in my life before."
Yeah.
And he's like, it's more likely that you're going to see one every 10 years than once in a lifetime. I've been kind of hopeful that what we've gone through this past summer is like, well, got my drought, checked off of my Cameron's grazing life bingo card.
Hmm.
And so now I don't have to ever worry about it again because it's not going to happen in my lifetime. Um, so unfortunately, that's not the case. And he gave some really good advice there. One of the things that if I had to not complain, but make an adjustment to it is, yeah, we're talking about drought, but we just went through it. So my hope is, we're really prepared for the next one, but there it leaves a lot of questions open for what's going to happen in year one after that
Hmm.
drought, year two after that drought. How do I make sure in year one after the drought, I'm not damaging those plants and creating a more stressful environment on those plants so that we see a higher prevalence of weed species pop up. So it we will report on that as we see it anecdotally here on the home farm. But one of the things too that he brought up was fertility. Drought is just a lack of moisture.
Hmm.
There are plenty of other plant stressors that go into whether your plant's going to be able to withstand those drought conditions and stress in general. So one of those stressors, overgrazing. If we
Yep.
just park our animals out there and say, "Well, go fend for yourself," because I can't afford the hay. Big stressor there. If our plants are already in an environment that maybe a lower nutrient availability than what they need, stressor there. So it's stacking stress on top of stress. And my hope is we use this year to rebuild and get everything back to where it needs to be. But it's a tall order.
Yeah, I heard a guy say, oh, it's probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, that as soon as your drought is over, you start planning for the next one. And
Yeah.
you make all your grazing decisions from here on out all about planning for the next drought. And I know Steve Kenyon, he's famous for bale grazing up there in Alberta, Canada. And when Canada had their big drought here a few years ago, he was posting videos online where you're just walking through this beautiful, tall, lush grass. And I say tall, it's,
Right.
8, 10, 12 inches. Just beautiful, lush grass. And then there's this visible line where after that, the grass is really short and just brown. And, his statement was, we bale grazed here up to this point. And that residual left over from those bales, while we all hate to see that, has made it so that that soil is able to retain moisture. And there was this visible line. It was a night and day difference in it. But he had gone through a drought years before that and had heard that, you start planning for the next one. And one of the good ways to do that is with bale grazing. So you're just adding more into that soil so that it can retain that moisture. But it was flat out amazing. It was a night and day difference. It truly was. So yeah, I've got producers asking me, they've been asking me since fall, when they got a little shot of rain and that grass came and they want to get in there and graze that. And they keep saying, oh, don't overgraze it because it's already been severely stressed and you're going to stress it that much more. But it's a hard decision to make. I know we called off, 50 ewes of our bottom end and just had a gal out here the other day, and she said, "This is all you have?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we just got rid of
Mm.
50 because it was so stinking dry and hay prices are so high." And so it's just a
Right.
a way to improve the flock and to get through this winter. But it's not the
Yeah,
easiest
my
thing.
my goal I had set was to be able to graze our stockpile. We had fed some hay during those dry seasons uh, on some sacrifice pasture, and then had fed some to some sheep in the barn that were lambing in the fall later in 2024. But the goal was when sheep came back off of the solar site that we had them on, I didn't want to have to feed hay until we got to lambing
Hmm.
season. So that meant like my goal was early February, and try to get some hay into those girls at late gestation. And so we're still grazing stockpile right now. This is probably the latest I've ever grazed, and and this is stockpile that's been stockpiled since June. And we had just left to try to hopefully capture some moisture in the fall.
Yeah.
And my fear is, we're not scalping it. We still have ground cover, and I knew that was going to be an important part of that. I'm really curious to see what it comes back as. Uh, this spring, how quickly does it jump and take off? And hopefully, those ewes during late lactation will be able to get onto that grass and start rotating those pairs, those ewes and lambs together through those pastures. But it's a we fed some hay during that very cold spell when we
Hmm.
had snow and it froze at the
Yeah.
same time. And so they were digging through some, but like here, it's cold, save your energy. You're in late gestation, so I want to provide something to you. But we are still supplementing out on pasture again to provide that energy to those ewes that are in late gestation. But it has me hopeful. And this was one of the comments made out of a presentation yesterday. As we look at our weather trends, we're trending in the Midwest and uh, kind of the eastern portion of the Midwest to be a little warmer and have a little more precipitation, allowing for increased grazing days.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the timeline is to add those additional grazing days, but unless we get a severe snow event, freezing event, uh, that would prevent ewes from digging through that snow to graze it off, it has me hopeful that maybe we can really strive to have that 60-day hay feeding window. Can we get
Yeah.
it down to 30 days of a hay feeding window?
Hmm.
The biggest question for us is does it how late are we going to get that frost? How late is it going to stay cold? Because that's what can really mess you up is, you may not get good growth here until the end of April
Hmm.
because our winter our winter isn't done until
Yeah.
into April some
Yeah.
years.
It
So
just keeps, yeah, it
you
just
just got
keeps
to be
hanging on.
flexible.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to plan ahead. Um, I've gotten a little better at it over the years, but I keep telling myself every day those sheep are out eating grass is the day I'm not feeding hay. And I just have to keep looking at it like that. It is literally kind of take it one day at a time, and I can look out ahead and I know I've got 3 or 4 or 5 weeks easy worth of grazing yet. So we'll see how well that works. I did get up to the back of the farm, and there's two pastures up there that do not have a lot of grass in them. Um, Probably going to open those up and make much bigger paddocks than we normally do. But I figure with those four pastures there combined, we'll at least get a week, maybe 10 days out of that. But again, that's a week or 10 days that I'm not feeding hay. And then I've heard, I've not done the samples myself, but I've heard for years now that anything that's out there is going to be better than your, low quality first cotton hay, which is what I'm pretty much stuck with. So I figure
Yeah,
they're
and
doing
that
better out
was
there, and there's still green out there. I'm amazed how much green grass is still there. There's a lot of brown, but there's still some green grass in there.
that's crazy. That's one of the topics, Tom. I would have thought that you might have been sitting in that room with what you what you just brought up, but the one of the aspects that was part of the presentation was the importance of pulling a hay sample
Hmm.
and knowing, am I meeting nutrient requirements with my hay? And the majority of the examples were cattle, but these were Kentucky examples with predominantly fescue based hay, and a very significant portion of that hay that had been tested was meeting their dry or gestating cow uh, maintenance requirements. And so you look at that and you say, man, I if we pulled a hay sample, and that's something I've got the probe sitting out on the deck now. We're going to pull samples on a bunch of the hay that we bought in just to see, hey, where do I need to feed this in early lactation, late lactation? Do I need to find uh, some better hay, which is probably not going to be an option because the better hay, if you think uh, the average hay is expensive, the good stuff is through the roof
Yeah,
in our region. But can I supplement to offset what those requirements are going to be? So we're going to pull samples, send them off, and probably walk through an example or two on just on what we find on that forage analysis here on the podcast. But uh, yeah, it was really interesting when you look at he broke it down from a price on the nutrient basis on the TDN
okay,
energy,
yeah,
uh, and the cost of hay to feed that cow in the dry lot was I think like $1.57, $1.67, and then to graze stockpile was like 60 cents.
yeah,
And so you ask the question, well, what would you rather have? And, well, the obvious answer is I'd rather have the 60 cents per head
yeah,
per day. And so to your point, Tom, that ten days of hay that you're not feeding
mhm,
by grazing that stockpile. 10 days, if you're the same math, say it equates or carries over to sheep, if you're at a dollar a day on 100 head, you're at $100 a day for
hmm,
10 days.
yeah,
You've saved yourself $1,000.
yeah,
And again, we know with sheep, it's going to be a little bit different, the math. But I would challenge people to even, it doesn't matter if you're in a drought or not. If you're making your hay, great. If you're buying your hay, great. Work the same math and say, what does it actually cost for me to manage my ewes over the winter time, even through the year,
yeah,
on a per ewe, an individual head basis, how much does that ewe cost to keep around annually? And all of a sudden, the ones that are having a single, when it takes 80, maybe $100, these are arbitrary numbers to keep a ewe around. You say, well, you gave me one lamb, and that lamb was worth $140. Yeah, and then factor in your feed costs on that lamb. That ewe that's having twins for you is paying the bills. The other
yeah,
one might be break even,
yeah,
but you don't know until you factor those numbers out.
yeah. Years ago, God, this was back in the '90s. We went to some farm, and the couple that was running things, they were just showing you how you could just go into these weird areas where you never really think of as being grazing, but they would measure, like the one was around a bunch of machinery. And so we went in there and we measured the forage that was in around that bunch of machinery. This was not a pasture field by any stretch of the imagination, but they sat down and did the math and said, this is what it costs us to feed our cows every day. If we can put a temporary fence around this machinery area and graze cows here for one day, this is how much money we could save. And
Mm.
this light bulb just went off for me, and I was like, man, I got places like that everywhere on my farm. And that was back when, we were just making hay on as much as we could, but there were all these places where I couldn't get in to make hay, and I started thinking, geez, if I could get my cows up in there and graze this off, and so I've just retained that information, and it is, I try to tell everybody the same thing. Every day you can graze is the day you're not feeding hay, and your grass is always going to be cheaper than the hay, whether you're buying it or baling it. But it's uh, it's just something I've tried to live by, and I think it's made a big difference. And I know every year as I work with producers, you can get them to stretch it out an extra 10 days because they're grazing places they hadn't thought about grazing before. And just like with you, you're grazing further into the year than you've ever grazed before, coming off a drought year, no less. So
Right,
I,
right, right.
it does make a difference, but it was
Yeah,
not
and that's
not something you
something.
want to go through again, but it made you
No,
stretch and made you learn a little. And
yeah,
I think that information is extremely valuable, and you have to keep thinking about that stuff.
and it has really changed our mindset and our outlook on how do you take advantage of those marginal spaces
Hmm.
around the farm, to your point, around the machinery, around, I mean, we had sheep running through the backyard at mom and dad's, just
Hmm.
because, yeah, there was 4 inches of grass there, but there were no parasites
Yeah.
because it had been mown for
Yeah.
um th 3 months prior. Let's let it grow a little bit, and is that a day worth of forage?
Hmm.
And when your grass is not growing at the rate you need it to, um, you say, okay, yeah, a day actually makes a difference. But it's one day closer to getting rain, one day that I don't have to feed hay. It's really pushed us too on the that woodlot pasturing
Yep.
event that we've got a gas line that runs through a section of woods, and had cleared out a small section of woods over the past couple of years to attempt some silvopasture type grazing. And again, it was marginal ground that all it was doing was housing coyotes and uh, some deer. It's like, well, let's take advantage of it. And was nervous to fence off anything else. Well, you start walking around and say, well, we don't have anything else to graze. Let's fence this off, because what's it gonna hurt? We're either feeding hay up on top of the woods, and makes for a great sacrifice. And that probably extended our grazing season in the summer, our drought relief period, by 2-3 weeks. We were in
Yeah.
there cutting trees down, letting them forage off of branches. And that
Yeah.
was, and I think I've either shared it with Tom or on here before, just the resilience in in these sheep. I mean, a whole new appreciation for what they're willing to do. I watched you walk up to a smaller kind of what we'd call a scrub tree, and I'm not a forester, so I can't tell you what variety it is, but walks up to this smaller tree. She's eaten every leaf off of it, and then puts that tree between her front two legs, and then continues to walk up the tree, bending it
Hmm.
over. I mean, I'm watching, National Geographic here at this point, in the
Yeah.
backyard of animals that are just, foraging
Yeah.
in this area, to the point that, we're this spring we're putting fence around the whole thing. That
Hmm.
was 2/3 of woods, and we were like, I don't think we can get around that other third with the poly wire. And wish we would have done that in a heartbeat. But to the point that, again, we've justified the cost of the fence to say, hey, if this gives us another 2 weeks worth of rest period on our pasture land out in another field, then it's worth it. And this is how we can make it pencil with that fence cost. So
Yeah,
it
and
really,
some of that is amazing. And if you actually did a forage test on it, and some of those plants that we just think are junk, they've got some amazing amount of nutrients in them.
oh yeah. Yeah, it completely, it's one of those things, again, I hope I never have to go through it again. Um, I'm planning that I will, but it
Hmm.
completely has shifted our goals and changed what I thought was not possible, but it forced you to do things that maybe you were a little uncomfortable doing.
Yeah,
That was one of them. Use came out of that woodlot in what I would say a good body condition. They didn't lose
yeah,
body
yeah.
condition. And when we brought ewes back and to try to minimize some hay feeding there later this fall, we were grazing corn stalks, and uh, ewes came off of corn stalks in a better body condition
Hmm.
than what they went on. And
Yeah,
I don't have hard data and p values for you there, but I just run them through the chute. Body condition scores were up, and they looked good. And I've shared wasn't a whole lot of corn out
yeah,
out in that field. They might have picked up an ear or two, but that was not an older combine corn picker that I had been through fields
yeah,
before and go, oh man, we could finish lambs out on this
yeah,
stuff. There was one ear every 2 acres. So
yeah.
so it
Yeah,
again
it is
something we're going to do in
amazing.
the future.
Yeah, it is amazing. You get out of your comfort zone and you do some of this stuff. I've often said too that even if it is just lousy forage, you're not going to set them animals back horribly if you just do it for a few days and then you get them back on something good. It's you know, how many of us have gone on a diet for a week and then we didn't lose anything, so we just went back to where we were.
That's
So,
fair. That's fair. The other thing you have to think about is, we're not talking about trying to put these ewes through this during lactation
right,
or put lambs through
right.
it during a growing phase of life. These
Yep.
are open ewes um, that need to fill a maintenance requirement.
Hmm.
And so that's when you can play, in my opinion, play around and figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
We never would have tried it if we wouldn't have been forced to do it. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to try some of these things. And they're things that we're going to put into our management repertoire here on out.
Yeah. And I know, like, as far as grazing the yard, I like to overgraze the yard because I hate to mow grass, and if it'll set it back, I'm all for it.
Yeah, my wife gets a little how what's the word? Not annoyed, but if it were up to Cameron, rip out the landscaping, get some orchard grass, red clover in there, and we
Yeah,
would run them. We would run them to the back door,
yeah,
and um, gotten close, but at some point where the play set is for the girls, you say, "Oh man, do we need to be stepping in this all the time? I don't have a problem with it." And then we track it into the car and into the
yeah,
house, and it already gets there whether we want it to or not. But maybe we could try to avoid the play set.
yeah.
So
When we fence in our yard, we spend more time fencing out. We have a garage that doesn't have a door on it, so we have to put something across that 'cause we don't want them in there. I want them up on the porches, so I got to fence all that out. We spend more time fencing things out than we actually do putting the fence up around the yard. And got a few bushes that I'm not sure are too healthy for sheep, so we put a fence around that. So we really do spend more time fencing out than we do fencing in. And but yeah, quite a few times we've just the yard's gotten ahead of me, and then the tight wad in me says, "Oh, we should just bring sheep down here, let them eat this," as opposed to before we go ahead and mow it, and then. But yeah, you do end up. I'd done this once on a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then went to church with sheep manure on my shoes without
oh,
thinking
no.
about walking through there. I had to go to the restroom, clean my shoes off once I got
Oh
there.
no.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, I hadn't really thought that part through. But I didn't have to mow the yard for a couple of weeks though. That was like a month and a half I didn't have to mow the yard because I kind of let that grass grow for a while.
And you think that grass is pretty palatable, very young,
Yep,
tender, has been set back maybe 3 or 4 times
yep.
earlier in the season, and they'll go to town on it.
hmm And I think, they were happy with it. They liked it a good bit, but it was also fun kind of sitting there in the kitchen, drinking a cup of coffee and watching lambs play in the yard. So
Yeah.
it's
Ultimately, I would just say, if you see a workshop or uh, I've been impressed with both American Forage and Grassland Council, and I think it's Council. I probably ought to look that up. American Forage and Grassland, along with National Grazing Lands. If you're interested and passionate about grazing livestock, or uh, maybe you don't realize you're as passionate as what you need to be, a lot of just very involved people that enjoy enjoy that pastoral ecology stuff, and it's fun. I think it's infectious to be around. Some of the discussion, it's like, oh man, I got to be checking that. I need to be looking at that. Again, those producer presentations yesterday, couple of couple of things that those guys were doing, and you say, I could add that in.
yeah,
That's really I like that idea.
yeah.
It's the networking that really has a lot of value there. So I would encourage you to find that group and go and interact. And it could be, I know where Tom's at. You guys have a Western PA grazing group, correct?
Yeah, Western PA Grazing Conference, that's coming up in March. I'll have to find those dates out exactly and put those in the next episode just to see where we're at with that. And that's usually a pretty good conference. It's a nice facility and so on. It's easy to get to, easy to park and all that fun stuff. And just the way that whole facility is laid out, it's easy to hear. No matter where you sit, you can see well and all that. A couple of screens up, so there's never a bad seat. So on. It's usually a pretty good one. So our Pennsylvania Grazing Conference is this coming Wednesday, and I've been dragging my feet to decide
And
whether I should go or not. But I guess now, after talking to you, I should call them up and register, even though I'm gonna have to pay the late fees for the registration. But
it's worth
it's just a one day
it.
event, couple hour drive, be there, sit there all day, listen to all that, talk to some people, and then head back home. But so so you've talked me into it, Cam.
There we go. I would
Yeah.
encourage everybody else to, find something to go get involved in. I think it's easy to kind of seclude yourself and just do your own thing.
hmm
Uh, Not saying your own thing's a bad thing, but be willing to get out and listen and hear what everybody else is doing. Like newsflash, I'm not going to start making 850 acres of hay
Now,
with the with the old baler and trying to sell it to horse people, but had some really good discussion points there that it's like, oh, that applies to what we'd like to try to do if we
hmm
ever get back to making hay again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Cam, it's been fun catching up with you. So we thank you for listening to another episode of the Graze Your Sheep podcast. There's a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. You can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com if you got any questions or comments. So I guess maybe next week I'll report back on what the Pennsylvania Forage and Grasslands Council or whatever it's called. Again, I'll have to
Yeah.
look that up and find out exactly what it is called. There's so many different ones, I can't keep them straight.
Yeah, 'tis the season for conferences. My
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah. I like going to them too. Get it, kind of, especially once I get to stay overnight, because then it's just like a mini vacation.
Yeah.
Then I'm not gone so long that I have to worry about everything at home. Just set
Yeah,
things
all the
up.
train wrecks you're coming
Yeah,
back
just
to.
set things up to get through one day of being away and then come back. So, all right, there, Cam. So we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, Tom. Have a good one.
All right, bye.